There is a theory in psychology that birth order can dictate or at least have great influence over your personality. Due to nature or nurture or both, the sequence in which a child is born within their family, from firstborn to the youngest and every position in between, shapes their thoughts and behaviors. Newborn children, of course, are very dependent on and connected to their birthing parent, often the mother, especially while breastfeeding. But when that child is weaned and another child comes along, that older child is sort of passed off to the other parent so that the birthing parent can attach and bond and feed the second-born. This is just part of the logistical reality that goes into establishing family dynamics, but it's a powerful one. The firstborn will often have a great amount of responsibility once younger siblings come into the picture. They might face stricter parenting and higher expectations, which typically leads to strong leadership and high achieving qualities. We see this in Esau. He has a great amount of responsibility. He's expected to go out hunting and fishing and gathering with his father Isaac, while Jacob also has his responsibility. That responsibility was in the home. The amount of risk that Esau is expected to take far exceeds the risk that Jacob is expected to take. And Jacob's responsibilities rely on Esau's. You can't cook without food. Jacob, on the other hand, is connected to his mother, spending all his time with her at home, preparing food and tending to their domestic needs. Birth order theory says the attention-seeking, can do no wrong baby of the family tends to be overindulged by all in the family. What the youngest does in response to being overindulged impacts how they move through the world. Some youngest children will believe that they are to be taken care of and may lack the internal drive to excel and the confidence to manage tasks successfully. However, other youngest children may appreciate being taken care of and want to take care of others, becoming respected as the go-to in the family. I think Jacob fits into this role as the youngest child, overindulged with a story about the inevitability of receiving the birthright and the blessing, that I think he thought that he was more worthy of it than his brother Esau. I think he held that tension of feeling entitled to being taken care of while also wanting to be seen as the more responsible one. These boys are twins, but we see that even before they are born, their birth order was going to be highly effectual in establishing their family dynamics. Before their birth, the twins seem to have moved around so much during the pregnancy that perhaps it caused Rebecca pain or discomfort. I've never experienced pregnancy myself, but I have heard the stories of babies kicking ribs and bladders. I imagine that the pregnancy was quite miserable, and their jostling, their constant movement was interpreted by Rebecca as a struggle between them. Either the psychological distress of imagining your two children just constantly struggling against each other, constantly battling, or the physical distress of constantly struggling babies that she had prayed so hard for in her belly, or both, right? These things caused her to question why she was even living. If it is to be this way, why do I live? The story that God responds to her desperation with is this: 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. There's a new podcast out right now called The Retrievals, about women who underwent fertility treatments, and particularly about their experience of egg retrievals in the IVF process. One woman that they interview is Filipina, and she was the oldest daughter in her own family, which meant by cultural expectation that she had caretaking responsibilities for the other children in her family. She did not enjoy this responsibility and expectation, and so for her whole life, she said over and over again that she didn't want children. She didn't want children. She didn't want children. And then she changed her mind and wanted to have children. and she wasn't able to conceive. In her perspective, her words, her proclamations that she didn't want children had created her infertility. Her words had created a world she now lived in. She admits to the listeners that they will probably disagree, that they will not share her perspective, but that was her firm belief. I don't agree with her completely. I don't think she caused her fertility with her words, but I do believe that our words have great power. Words create worlds. I was a wanted baby. There was a miscarriage before me, and I was conceived as soon as it was safe to try again. When it was time for my birth, I was not ready to be born, though I weighed almost 10 pounds. My mom labored for hours and hours and hours, and finally the call was made. A C-section was necessary. During the procedure, the numbing medication started to wear off on my mom, and so they immediately gave her anesthesia, putting her completely under while I was born. So hours later, as she came to, I was rolled into her hospital room, having been cleaned up and tended to, and as she tells it, I was glowing. There was just light around my face. I was just so beautiful, she says. The world that this story built for me was one that said I was special in some way. I had some special responsibility, that God was somehow particularly present at my birth, trying to communicate with my parents, and through my parents to me, that I was supposed to be good. Did my mom interpret it that way? I don't know, but I did. This was the story I interpreted. I interpreted that the light around me, the glow, as God's presence, as God's sign of what was to come, that I was supposed to figure out how to be good for God. I did not write the beginning of that story. I did not tell the story of the glow, but I picked it right up, and I continue to write this story that was handed to me. In some ways, this story was guiding for me in a good way. I'm proud of my decisions and the profession I chose, but in other ways, it was such a burden. I have never relaxed a single day in my life. Because what does it mean, right? What does it mean that I have this great responsibility? I can't waste any time. And what does it mean that my sister was not told that story? Jacob and Esau did not write the story that began before they were born, that they were two nations in their mother's belly who would constantly be at odds with one another, that they would struggle forever, that one of them would be stronger over the other, that the elder would serve the younger. But they heard it, and they knew it. And I wonder, because that was the story that was handed to them, that it became true. That they fulfilled the prophecy by their own will. They did not write the beginning of that story. They did not tell the story of the struggle, but they picked it right up and continued to write the story that was handed to them. Jacob takes advantage of his brother's hunger to manipulate him to give away his birthright, which means a double portion of the inheritance that he'll receive as the oldest child, because the oldest child will bear the greater responsibility upon the parent's death. Later in the story that we didn't hear for today, the next part of the story, Jacob and Rebekah together trick Isaac, the father, by putting hair on Jacob's arms to trick Isaac into giving Jacob the blessing that was meant for his brother Esau. All because of a story that was told before the boys were even born. Could Jacob have been grasping his brother's heel because he loved Esau? That he wanted to be connected to him forever? Could it be that he heard his mother's interpretation of those events, and that was the only story he knew? And so that created the world that they lived in forever. There are a million stories that we can tell about our lives. There are so many ways to interpret the events of our lives. I wonder what would happen if we became aware of the stories we didn't write, or the ones that we continue to write, and consider whether or not these are even the worlds we want to live in. Do we want to live in the world, in the story, where we are burdened by this overwhelming sense of existential responsibility to do something that matters? Do we want to live in the world, in the story, where we are destined to be constantly struggling, constantly at war? What is it? What is the world that we want to live in? What stories can we start writing about that world? What stories can we start telling to future generations, to the generations here with us now, that feel like liberation, that feel like peace and gentleness and connectedness and joy and love? What stories have we been handed that have helped us, that have given us hope and meaning to our lives and freedom and life? Thanks be to God for the chance at every turn of every generation to reevaluate the stories we've inherited and the ones we want to leave behind. Amen.